Welcome to Mindshock True Crime. The topic of the day is neutrality in true crime. True crime neutrality, investigator neutrality, objectivity while attempting to solve cases. Why it's important, why there are problems with it, and also the same thing for the online sleuth community. You see the same issues there. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications. Make sure your device allows those notifications to come through. Or you can just go to youtube.com/Mindshock. Like and share the podcast, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic logical analysis, co-podcast, and requests. You can also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. So let's get right to it. So in a lot of cases, let's look at police investigators, private investigators, depending on how much experience they have, how many cases they have worked on, how many cases they have solved. Naturally, they're gonna have biases. Now, some of the biases align with statistics. For example, if a female is met with foul play, most of the time, it is the significant other, the boyfriend, the husband, the ex-boyfriend, the wannabe boyfriend, whatever the case may be. That is the number one prime person of interest and or suspect for a reason. Because most of the time it works out that way. Now, here's the challenge. In the cases that it doesn't work out that way, how blinded are investigators? Now, we see an extreme of this, for example, in the Stephen Avery case. In the Stephen Avery case, the police department, Manitowoc, Corruptiwoc, they had it out for him. So maybe there was a certain percentage of the department that truly believed that he was guilty and it wasn't like a frame-up of an innocent man like the 85 frame-up. So they might have believed it. So they went along with all the corruption and the cover-up and the framing because they truly believed he was guilty. They had a one-track mind. They didn't honestly investigate the ex-boyfriend, Ryan Hilligus. They didn't honestly investigate all these other individuals on the periphery with motive, means, and opportunity. They focused in on a guy with no motive, no means, no opportunity. For those that argue that, again, check out the Mindshock episodes in the Stephen Avery series. That place was buzzing. That was a bustling Avery salvage yard with all of these witnesses on how he's walking up to them, talking to them, people coming and going. Nobody even saw a bonfire. It's again, if you trace it from the earlier statements, before all the manufacturing of false confessions and false narratives, the original statements from everybody, Avery was coming and going, talking to everybody. So he really didn't have the motive, means, or opportunity. And then he was at the cabin in Crivets when all of this commotion was going on with the burn pit, everything being moved, and the photos, of course, being traced, the barrels. Again, if you haven't checked out the series, make sure you check it out. I go through all of that. But the point is, some investigators had a one-track mind. And again, whether they were honest or not, that's a whole separate issue. But even if they were honest, how do you keep that objectivity in check? So we could even look at the Gabby Petito case where everybody's jumping on the boyfriend and he may very well be guilty, but let's say for the sake of argument, he abandoned her and it was a crime of opportunity by another individual. You would never even explore that if you had only a one-track mind for the boyfriend. And again, statistically, it's likely to be the boyfriend. And in most cases it is. But if you're really after the truth and you want to solve the case, you can't be blinded by statistics. You shouldn't go the other way either. Like in the Maura Murray case, everybody ignores the major statistics and doesn't even investigate the boyfriend, ex-boyfriend, whatever. Obviously, that's a mistake. So in maintaining neutrality, you'd have to approach all theories with objectivity and honestly investigate all theories without biases and see where the evidence does or doesn't lead you, or where the gaps in evidence could suggest possible veracity for certain theories. Now, this is where the online web sleuth community, so to speak, excels, not because of single individuals, although there are plenty of astute individuals out there that don't have the biases that a so-called professional investigator or a law enforcement investigator would. They might have a wider pool to draw upon in terms of experience or logical applications. Obviously, police officers or trained investigators, most of them do not hold PhDs or high levels of education in philosophy, deductive reasoning, critical thinking. They're not logicians, none of these things. So they are at a deficit in certain areas regarding outside the box thinking or connecting the dots in ways that they might not have thought to connect, or they don't teach to connect in the academy. So obviously what they do teach in law enforcement is, again, the statistics. So you would be, because they're the ones out there dealing with the crimes, the problem happens is, of course, all the innocent people convicted, all the unsolved crimes. That's a glaring issue. Some departments have a less than 50% clearance rate. Not very good. Can you imagine if a pilot or a taxi driver, a train conductor, they only got to their destination 50% of the time or less, or even 60%, even if you go more than half, 60% of the time, even 70% of the time? That's not great. So out of 100 trips, 30 don't make it. Those are not great statistics, but for some reason, a lot of law enforcement apologists, they just say, oh well, it can't be solved, it can't be solved. I think it can be solved. I think just about every case out there can be solved. That's my opinion. I think there are people not smart enough to solve it, and that's not to disparage law enforcement. There's plenty of geniuses out there not in law enforcement who still can't solve it. Just because the information is not there, the evidence is not there, needs to be gathered, more intel, more info, and it needs to be gathered in particularly creative ways that are not directly reflective of intelligence. As Einstein allegedly said, imagination is more important than knowledge. Because how do you get the answer? It'd be curious. There's a television show. It's quite famous in its time. Was it the 2000s, early 2000s? House MD. It was kind of like a Sherlock Holmes medical drama comedy type TV show where the lead was this just obnoxious, wisecracking doctor who was just reckless and outside the box as you can get, but also very creative in attempting to connect the dots to get diagnoses, to solve cases, so to speak. In law enforcement, that seems to be severely lacking because everybody goes by the book. And what's the difference there? For example, as in House MD, he was able to solve cases that nobody else could solve, these medical mysteries, whereas everybody going by the book couldn't solve them because going by the book has severe limitations. Same thing in law enforcement. There are many limitations. Some of them are legal. Obviously, law enforcement break the law. They get false confessions all the time, too. But at the same time, en masse, they can't just violate everybody's rights all the time. They can't just beat information out of a suspect. They can't just... There's certain... sometimes they try to do that, but en masse, the majority of officers cannot do that for the majority of cases and don't. So in certain ways, law enforcement's hands are tied in solving certain cases, so you would need extraordinary imagination to try to get the evidence required, to gather the data required to solve some of these cold cases with so many missing pieces in order to either not break the law, or even when that's not a factor, even if you wanted to break the law, if the person's not there or whatever the case may be, even if you had free range to break the law, you still might not solve cases because the means to gather the information is not there with or without breaking the law. And that's where it gets really, really tricky. So this is where having a team really, really comes into play to be able to solve a lot of these cases. Online true crime communities benefit from having just such a large pool of people that can just throw in their experience. You literally, in some cases, have thousands or tens of thousands of people chiming in with little points or debunkings or whatever the case may be in particular cases to move the cases forward that, a few investigators sitting around in a police office, all with the same training background, they wouldn't be able to do that. So those are the benefits of online communities, and there definitely should be, if police really were that interested in solving cases, there would definitely be more bridges for these communities to work together. And I think it's kind of like the case for anybody that keeps up with gun statistics, FBI statistics. I mean, these are really, really damning, but private citizens stop mass shootings and crimes less error than police in terms of shooting innocent bystanders or whatever. So that does not make the police look good in any way, because the police have a much higher error percentage in these public shooting situations. Now, how bad would it look if all of these just online people, a lot of which are goofs, are just solving more cases than the police? I mean, that would not look good. So there's definitely an ego issue at play that I think really prevents a lot of communication and teamwork in these communities. But back to the original point, if an investigator, even working alone or as part of a team, if most of the cases that they've had to deal with were all the husband murdering the wife, or whatever the case may be, or we can flip it, or if they investigated a lot of husbands getting killed, it was always the wife. If that was always true in almost in every case or almost every case, naturally that's where their brain is going to be at, and it's kind of hard to fault them because they have that real world experience. So, but in the cases where that's not the case, are they going to be more or less likely to solve it than another investigator, even maybe a green investigator who hasn't done a lot of cases, that's looking at all the angles, that's looking at the totality of evidence available in every case to reach the conclusion objectively and neutrally? And that's the real key, because you also see that in within the online community, just people that have followed so many cases. If most of those cases involved a certain scenario being true, they're obviously going to gravitate towards that scenario and be dismissive of other scenarios. I mean, depending on how logical they are. The average individual, of course, does not possess an incredibly great level of logic. It's average, below average. I mean, it's not looking good out there in the general public, but... And I don't know if it's that much better within the true crime community. Perhaps a little bit of like the genuine fans, not the trolls and the steers and the obfuscators who are intentionally creating trouble in certain cases. But just in general, people that are attracted to true crime, they might be attracted to mystery. They read a lot. Obviously, only a certain, I'm not talking about, I don't know if it's the majority percentage, but a certain percentage. So they would be more logical. They would be more into Sherlock Holmes type thinking, as opposed to just thinking one theory is always true no matter what, even if the statistics back it. Because again, if they back it 90% of the time, how do you know when you're dealing with the other 10% of the time? I mean, that's really a good question, because you see all these goofs out there throwing around phrases, oh, what's more likely? This is more likely. Misapplying Occam's razor left and right. But where is the evidence that this particular case they're commenting on is part of the 90% as opposed to the 10%? And nobody wants to think about that. And when all of these goofs are proven wrong, they kind of just pretend they weren't wrong, and then they repeat the same process for the next case. You see that all the time online. Now, whether or not you see that with law enforcement investigators, that's a better question. I mean, I don't know if those metrics exist, so to speak. I mean, you have the Delphi area in Indiana with a lot of unsolved murders. I mean, I think the majority of murders are unsolved in that area. So there, you can't even say, oh, this case was solved and it turned out to be this person, and in the next case, that's where the bias was, because they don't really seem to be solving much of anything in that area. So that's another issue. If you haven't checked out the Delphi murders on Mindshock, you can check that out. We do comprehensive, exhaustive deep dives into every theory in that case and other cases as well. And this seems to not occur both in the real world investigation and in most of the online community, which is why so many cases are unsolved. There's a lot of cold cases out there. Also, the limitations of technology is definitely an area of bias. Most people are indoctrinated into the cult of scientism and authority worship. So if they get something back from an official looking lab with some kind of an official-looking header, they're going to think that a DNA match means a DNA match and completely ignore all of these individuals being exonerated that were previously found guilty based on so-called scientific DNA evidence. That's a major area of bias where all these people put blind religious faith in so-called scientific tests or scientific technologies, which of course have great limitations as well, but their limitations are never publicized, which is kind of weird too. I mean, it all to maintain appearances in this cult of scientism. There's really not a lot of emphasis put on false positives, the limitations of the tests, threshold limits, degraded samples, extrapolating the data from them, where it's basically the computer is filling in gaps, which it might fill them in accurately or not accurately. And all of these things need to be kept in mind. An investigator who has experience with scientifically flawed tests putting people away, they would look at that, whereas investigators who don't wouldn't. So I think in the real world with law enforcement or private investigators, the best thing really is to have an assembled team with a lot of different backgrounds, with a lot of different experiences. That way they'll be looking at everything, and just a general team leader that's well-versed in logic, so that way they can coordinate the team and not have anyone be dismissive of others' theories. So that way everybody's bringing something good to the table, good ideas, and they can be examined honestly, objectively, and neutrally for veracity without dismissing anything. So you keep it all on the table and eliminate only what can truly be eliminated. Feel free to leave your own thoughts, theories, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind in the comment section. If you enjoy the podcast, you want to support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell for notifications. You can also like and share the podcast. Share it on social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topological analysis, co-podcaster requests. You can also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.